We want to start with a quick word of prayer, and then we'll get in. This is our question and answer time. This is where you can get your questions answered, we hope. You're ready? You're up for that? All right. Let's go ahead and start with just a quick word of prayer. Father in heaven, right now we just want to thank you for being with us so far over this last few hours. And Lord, we just pray now that as Dr. Youngberg shares, we will be able to be strengthened, enriched, challenged, that we might be able to use our resources well to care for our bodies and to be a service to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, Kurt, you had a word you wanted to mention about books. Oh, we'll do that after that. That's right. Okay, so now it's a Q&A. And I have a question.
All right.
I get to go
first. That's
appropriate. Well, the first one is probably easy.
All right. I like those.
Yeah. It's a personal one. I'm wondering, have you ever treated or had the opportunity to treat or heard about tinnitus?
Yes, I have. That's a fairly common problem. Mm-hmm. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to fix. But the key is looking at the underlying risk factors that an individual has. So whenever I'm presented with something where I'm not really clear on the cause, we start looking at low-lying fruit, so to speak. In other words, what are the areas which are pretty obvious from doing the initial evaluation with the patient that would be good for them anyways?
Yeah.
Okay, so start addressing those things. And many times, if we do enough of that, then things that we don't fully understand just get better, okay, or oftentimes resolve. And so that's just a general principle for dealing with conditions that, we struggle on finding the actual underlying cause of.
Okay.
And one potential cause, because there's the idea of having these little bruits in the blood vessels near the tympanic membrane. And so if the blood is rushing through that and hits a little bit of plaque in that area, that creates an eddy, and that picks that the vibration of that eddy is picked up by the tympanic membrane. So that's one of many possible triggers for tinnitus. But like I said, there are many. Have been.
One more question, then Donna has a comment or question. In dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia, have there been any studies done? It seems to me like it's a growing problem and it's a first world problem. Are there studies that have been done comparing, say, a third world country or people that aren't having the kind of diets that we have with people in the first world that might show a contrast in causes?
The challenge with Alzheimer's, and if I haven't shown this slide already, we will see. I did show it last night, of that warehouse with 36 holes in the roof. And that's just putting it mildly. Really, Alzheimer's is such a complex condition that there could be 50 different underlying potential causes, and our task clinically is to try to pick up what the most common ones are for that individual, focus on that while we're still looking at the big picture. So the likely underlying cause is multiple causes of cognitive decline could be different from one area of the world to another, depending on environmental factors, depending on, are they more rigorous about controlling certain pesticides, for instance, okay, versus more liberal with using pesticides than the U.S. So that's just one of many examples. And so just the diet might be better, it might be more native to original diets, okay, but they also may be exposed to all kinds of other things, okay, that could be partly increasing risk as well.
I just want to know the goods or bads of charcoal. Tablets that you get, activated charcoal. What are the goods?
What are they good for?
Yeah.
All right. So what's charcoal good for? I love this question. Thank you, Donna. I don't go anywhere without charcoal. I didn't come to Yucaipa without charcoal. I don't have it on my person at the moment, but I have it in the car. Okay. We recently spent time in Dubai, this beautiful, city. And while there, we got exposed to some gastrointestinal problem, and my wife almost wasn't well enough to fly back. And if she hadn't immediately started charcoal after one of the meals we had at this beautiful resort, she would have probably been in a hospital for at least a few days. So charcoal is probably the single most important item you can have in your medical emergency kit, whether it's your car, your home, your office, etc. That's the number one thing. In fact, I have a whole bucket of activated charcoal in my garage, ready to meet the needs of my entire neighborhood if there were to be a cholera epidemic, or if something horrible happened to the grid and the electricity went down, water stopped functioning. You know what would happen? Gastroenteritis, gastrointestinal disease would just be skyrocketed, and there's no way you're going to go to the hospital. There's no way you're going to be able to call 911 to get help, because everything's going to be full. Okay, and so that's why if you have charcoal at home, medical activated charcoal, then you are very likely going to make it through without major problems or even death.
Excuse me, do you take it daily?
Okay, so the question is, how often do you take it? Well, first of all, you want to have it available just in case, if there's a problem. So that's the main thing. Now, I work with one of the second or third year form of testing tier form of testing that I recommend to many of my patients, especially if they have a complicated disease. Diseases where oftentimes there's a general sense that there's not much we can do for it, and that's what Alzheimer's would kind of fit into that category. So it's a very complex disease, and because of its complexity, if we're only focusing on addressing beta amyloid accumulation in the brain with various medications, those medications, by the way, have never been shown to dramatically alter the course of the disease. The disease continues to get worse. And so one of the tests that we do is mycotoxin testing, pesticide like glyphosate testing, urine testing, etc. And when we determine that somebody has a problem with mycotoxins, I mentioned last night that we can do a blood test called HLA-DRDQ. HLA stands for human leukocyte antigen, just a fancy medical way of describing the proteins produced by the white blood cell. And these proteins are glycoproteins. These have their tentacles in the outer membrane of the white blood cell. Those proteins can be measured on a blood test, and specific patterns of those proteins are uniquely associated with a significant susceptibility to mycotoxins, toxins from mold, that we can directly measure in urine, and we can measure in your home as well. The spores, the mold spores that create those mycotoxins that are pathologic or pathogenic. And so charcoal becomes, at that point, something that we use in small amounts, maybe 2 little capsules of charcoal every night before you go to bed. Now, when you do that, you have to make sure that you're paying attention to what else you're doing. Because if you're taking your prescription medication at bedtime, and you take charcoal at bedtime, you've just inactivated that prescription medication. Okay, that charcoal will absorb that. And now, charcoal doesn't technically adsorb or inactivate nutrients. It only inactivates toxins or different prescription medications that aren't natural normally to the body. I remember I was at a seminar with Dr. Agatha Thrash a long time ago at UC Pines, and I said to her, kind of incredulously, so like, how can charcoal determine whether something is a toxin or a nutrient? And she looked at me and very kindly and graciously said, well, Wes, we don't really know exactly how that works. And then she went on to explain exactly how it worked. And so basically, charcoal has this ability to electrostatically draw in certain molecules of a certain electromagnetic signature that's typically in the toxin spectrum. Okay, and many prescription medications actually have a similar electromagnetic spectrum, and so that's why it inactivates those. Like, for instance, if a toddler gets a hold of his or her mother's iron supplement that's chocolate coated, they used to make chocolate coated iron supplements many decades ago. They stopped doing that. Why? Because toddlers were getting iron toxicity and sometimes dying by eating the whole bottle of these iron supplements. Charcoal won't do a thing to iron overload because iron is not a toxin in of itself. Okay, it's not in that spectrum. So, but if you work at an ER, like my daughter works at an ER in Oceanside at Tri-City Medical Center, you know that one of the universal antitoxin that is used for almost everything, not everything, but almost everything, is charcoal. Okay, so you want to have it available for emergencies, but you can also use it appropriately most days of the week, but it has to be at least 2 hours away from other things, preferably 3 hours away from prescription medicines. Okay, and of course, if you're having food poisoning and you're starting to have major symptoms, you don't wait 2 hours till after you eat to take it. You take it immediately, right, to address that. So charcoal is high on my scale of one of the most important things that you want to have. Number one is charcoal. Number two is iodine for respiratory infections. We'll talk about that hopefully later today if we have time. To optimize the immune system. Iodine will kill any virus, any bacteria. Any virus. Ebola, HIV, there's studies on it. When I did the research on it, I was amazed. Iodine will kill any virus when it's exposed directly to it. Okay, so that's why if you have a respiratory virus, you inhale or use a nebulizer with iodine, and it dramatically lowers the viral load in your lungs, in your mouth, in your nostrils and sinuses as well. So iodine is number two, and then having pellets of chlorine dioxide available is critical for especially external uses and getting rid of mold in your home, getting rid of viruses. It's very strongly antiviral. It'll kill any virus as well, even probably more powerfully than iodine, and it's also antibacterial and antifungal. So having that for topical use, for the use in your building. You know what they used after the 2001 anthrax attack on the U.S. Senate building? Chlorine dioxide. That's how they got the senators back into the U.S. Senate building, is by fogging and using regular spray of chlorine dioxide. So there's a company called Safrax, SAFRAX.com, where you can order bags of these pellets. All you do is add water and it turns into chlorine dioxide solution. So those three things I stockpile. Okay, for emergency situations.
There are certain supplements that are advertised as being helpful for memory, One of them is focus factor, another one is clarity, and the most recent one I have seen is choline.
Choline?
Yes. Do these help?
Okay, so basically there's many different supplements that are promoted online or on TV as being beneficial for cognitive support. And of course, this is a big market right now because a lot of people are having cognitive problems. That's why we're talking about it. It's extremely common. It's been exponentially increasing in the last 4 years, and it's a huge problem. Diabetes and Alzheimer's in particular, death rates from those have just skyrocketed. And remember, they're similar conditions. Diabetes, you could say that diabetes is Alzheimer's of the pancreas, okay, and that Alzheimer's is diabetes of the brain. They're very similar, and I'll explain more of that later this afternoon. But in terms of the supplements, there's some formulas. There's hundreds and hundreds of formulas out there. And the key when you're looking at a formula is looking at the ingredients and then looking at the research on those ingredients, and are they using enough of those ingredients that according to the research should help you. So that's one of the challenges with many of the formulas is that, yes, they're adding good things, but is it at a benefit, preventive or therapeutic level? And those formulas can be quite expensive as well. But you asked about choline. The best form of choline that I use in my practice is CDP choline. CDP choline, also referred to as citicholine. In Europe, it's called citicholine. This is a special form of phosphatidylcholine that, about 90% of the U.S. public is deficient in choline. That's a bad, even more so than magnesium. About 80% of the public, or 70 to 80% of the public, is deficient in magnesium. So that's a big area that needs to be supplemented as well, above and beyond an optimal diet. But yeah, so the research is very clear. In fact, CDP choline is right up there in the top 2 or 3 supplements that I take myself, and that I would typically automatically recommend to anybody who's concerned about cognition. And the dose recommended in most of the medical literature is 1 gram a day, or basically 500 milligrams twice a day. I use the 250 milligram capsules, which are small, easier to swallow, and I recommend 2 of those twice a day for people who already have some awareness of cognitive decline. If they're just wanting to prevent a problem, maybe half that would be fine. Okay, but that's where we get into genetic testing. And we'll look at this afternoon further, but I look for specific genes that dramatically increase the risk of problems when there's deficiency of choline. There's one mutation in particular that's a very long acronym that wasn't worth memorizing for me because it's just a bunch of letters and numbers, that essentially, if you have a double copy mutation of that, you have a 1,500% greater chance of having organ dysfunction, significant organ damage when you're on a low choline diet. That's another reason why you want to be on lots of non-starchy vegetables. The cruciferous vegetables, all the vegetables with crossing patterns into leaves or stems, the cauliflower, broccoli, bok choy, Brussels sprouts, etc. Those are very rich. Vegetables of that kind are very rich in choline. So do that, but again, if you have cognitive concerns, take advantage of that supplement as well.
Okay, here's the next.
Yeah, I really enjoy the popcorn at night, the, Pop Secret. And I heard that that's one of the worst things for Alzheimer's. Is it the salt or is it the chemicals?
Well, okay. First of all, the goal is to move towards trying to have an earlier evening meal and then getting used to a lifestyle where we're not snacking at night. Okay? So now a lot of people say, well, it's just popcorn. There's really not that much to it, right? Okay, but it still impacts digestion and it impacts sleep as well. I think the number one thing that we need to pay attention to when we're looking at eating some type of snack like popcorn is oils, the seed oils in particular. Now, I'm not an anti-oil person, okay? Partly because I recognize that the biggest problem with the diet is not oil, it's actually sugar. Okay? And so now I'm not one that promotes a lot of oil. Okay, but I'm not going to tell patients to stop using any oil at all. I will actually oftentimes encourage extra virgin olive oil. Why? Because it has this extra virgin means it's the first pressing, the first cold pressing, and that is it's very rich in chemicals like plant-based chemicals, phytochemicals like oleocanthal, which actually block neurotoxins from doing their damage in the brain. So I want to have more oleocanthal, not less. Okay, so I will use olive oil, extra virgin olive oil on my salads, etc. Now you want to do that according to caloric needs. If you're trying to lose a lot of weight, you're not going to be using a lot of oil. You may use a little bit. Okay, but if many people who suffer with Alzheimer's actually lose too much weight, they start wasting away, and then their doctors, their neurologists, and primary doctors are saying, just eat anything that comes to mind so that you don't lose more weight. What's the problem with that? Okay, that's one of the worst things you can do for your brain, right? When you start eating anything. It's just like oftentimes in oncology, people don't die of the cancer, they die of wasting disease. They just die from losing way too much weight before the cancer actually gets them. And so the oncologist, to expand lifespan, says just eat whatever, even if it's just ice cream, eat a gallon of ice cream. Well, that is guaranteeing that you're never going to get rid of that cancer. That is basically giving up on the fight against cancer. You might extend life a little bit in terms of not losing so much weight, but at what cost? At the cost of guaranteeing that you're not going to survive the actual condition. So the bottom line is that I recommend certain oils like extra virgin olive oil. I recommend coconut chips. Like the meat of the coconut, like dried, or the regular, undried meat of the coconut. That is super high in fiber and it's rich in a saturated fat, but in a very different saturated fat that is actually good for the body and is actually good for the immune system, and it's an anti-infective. Okay, so a lot of my patients have this reactive hypoglycemia. Okay, and that means that their adrenals aren't working real well. Using coconut fat and medium-chain triglyceride oil can stabilize the blood sugars and stabilize the energy in the brain, so the brain is not under the stress that is damaging the hippocampi, as we've been focusing on this weekend. Okay, so that's why my point is I'm not anti-fat, I'm not anti-oil. We just got to balance it properly. The main principle is healthy foods, healthy oils, and definitely not seed oils. So this whole idea back when Dr. Ansel Keys did the 7-country study and suggested that we'd be far better off eating a lot of vegetable oils versus what we were eating, that was actually a really bad idea. Now we know that. I thought it was a great idea when I was studying it, but seed oils are really bad for the brain. Okay, so not seeds, not eating whole sunflowers or pumpkin seeds. Those are good for us, but no seed oils. They're much more likely to be rancid. They're much more likely to be high in chemicals, and they're way too high in omega-6 versus omega-3 fats. So we need more omega-3s. We need more nuts, more almonds, more walnuts. Even though they still have more omega-6 than omega-3, they're more balanced. And then more chia seeds, more flaxseed. You got to grind the flaxseed, but you don't have to grind the chia seed. So those are some of the principles that I recommend. So more healthy fats within balance according to weight. Okay, make adjustments. Somebody's losing weight, increase the fat intake. That's not bad. A lot avocados and so forth. So if you want to, just get a hold of Kurt or Rich. So who's got the mic? Right here. Oh, right here. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I have a lot of allergies, and I mean, literally almost earth. But I have a lot of allergies to food that would be good for me to eat, but I can't. So and I also have asthma, is there something out there that I could take that would help me and hopefully not be allergic to it? Because
great question. Okay, so allergies and asthma. So that gets into the weeds a little bit clinically, so there's multiple things that we would have to discuss on that. But let me make a couple points about this. Oftentimes when we're allergic to multiple foods, we have sensitivities, maybe would be the better word, to multiple foods. We're not truly allergic to all those foods. We may be allergic or really sensitive to a few of the foods, but because we're eating those few, that's creating intestinal permeability, or what we refer to as leaky gut syndrome. That's creating inflammation at the brush border, and so foods that normally would not get in, even not fully digested portions of food, get into the bloodstream, and we're really not sensitive to them, but because they're getting in an unnatural way because of leaky gut, now we're developing a reaction to that. Okay, but the point is that to address the broader sensitivity to multiple foods, we need to figure out what actual foods are the main target, are the creating the problem. And part of the time is just a problem with the gut, where we need to, there's natural strategies to actually heal the gut and get rid of what we call bacteriophages, which are viruses that are bad for us, that are invaded bacteria that are normally in the gut, and now they're creating a chronic low-grade infection in the gut, and they're protected against the immune system because they're inside another cell. Okay, so using an appropriate natural antimicrobial strategy to get rid of that, and then replenishing the probiotics, in particular bifidobacteria and lactobacilli, those two probiotics really took a hit during COVID. Whether it was a COVID infection or the vaccine, it destroyed those two bacteria, especially bifidobacteria. So we need to re-inoculate, re-infuse those into the system. So that's why I frequently will recommend a high-potency, multi-layer form of probiotics that has like 6 or 8 different types, but especially bifidobacteria and lactobacilli. And that can actually help address leaky gut. The other thing with leaky gut is taking an amino acid supplement, L-glutamine, at 5 grams, it's a scoop of it, about 15 minutes before 1 or 2 meals a day, and that'll help repair where the leaky gut is taking place.
Now, I don't eat any of those things that I have sensitivity to, because some of them cause anaphylactic. So,
yes.
So I have given up a lot of food.
So that goes back to my original point. We need to fix the original problem, not just avoid the food.
Okay, but
Yeah.
should I take a probiotic every day?
Well, again, that's a clinical question that requires a little bit more individual application, but the basic answer is bringing in probiotics and prebiotics, but also starting with, I have a product that I use for patients called Biocidin, which is a broad spectrum natural antimicrobial that can help clean up the gut dysbiosis, and then you replace it with healthy bacteria. So there's a lot to it. So that's about as far as I can go in a group discussion.
Okay, we got several questions. We probably won't get to all of them.
Okay.
But you're next.
Thank you. I was wondering, would charcoal help quicken the healing of a pressure wound along with infrared light?
Okay, so will charcoal help heal a pressure wound along with infrared light? So I'm a big fan of red light therapy and near infrared as well, and that can be very beneficial. There's actually a product that is designed for wound care that is actually made out of chlorine dioxide that helps heal those wounds, the bed sores and pressure wounds, very quickly. And so the key is addressing the original cause of the problem and having a good antimicrobial that's also antiviral, okay, to work on that so that there's healing without irritation. For instance, if you use betadine, right, the chemically treated form of iodine, which is typically what we'd use topically to prevent an infection on a wound, that will get rid of the infection, but it also irritates the wound. Okay, whereas chlorine dioxide does not do that. Okay, so that's a consideration as well. Yes.
What about, you mentioned earlier today about not getting enough sleep. There's a problem that a lot of people have, especially elderly males, have bladder problem or prostate problem where they simply can't sleep because they have to get up all the time.
Yes. So, those are one of the easier said than done strategies. There's various supplements that can be beneficial. There's prescription medicines that can be helpful as well for that purpose. Whenever you're dealing with bladder issues, I like a product that's called Prostatrol Forte. It's a combination of various herbs and nutrients that I find quite beneficial for many people. It's not a cure-all for everybody, but many people find that they're able to significantly decrease the number of times they wake up at night. Okay, Prostatrol Forte.
Okay, we've got two more questions and we'll need to.
Last night you mentioned blueberries as being very important. Are there other berries close to that, or is there something very special about
Yeah, there's
blueberries?
something special about berries in particular, especially dark berries like blackberries or boysenberries, blueberries. Blueberries just seems to be one of the ones that kind of rises to the top of the list as being super rich in antioxidants and other plant-based chemicals that are therapeutically beneficial. There's been studies showing that blueberries all by themselves improve cognition. So I, for instance, eat blueberries every day, every morning as part of my smoothie. And so that's on my list as part of my daily habits, healthy habits. But that's not to say that that's the only one. A general rule in nutrition is to try to vary what you consume. Where you're bringing in various different types of fruits, etc. But when we're dealing with things like cancer, when we're dealing things with weight loss, we're not wanting to push a lot of fruit because basically they're sweet. There's a lot of fructose there. And so we limit that relative to get the lion's share of the bulk of the food coming from the non-starchy carbohydrate foods like the greens and the colorful vegetables, etc. So for individuals where we're trying to limit the overall intake of fruit because of blood sugars or weight or whatever it might be, then I still recommend some blueberries or something like that, a little bit every day or every other day. I think that's very prudent.
Could you touch on sunshine? You mentioned early morning sunshine. Some people say between 10 and 2. I thought sunshine was, sunshine any time of the day.
Okay, well, we're really talking about several different things. We'll talk a little bit about this afternoon, but there's a concept that I call the sun shadow standard. Just looking for a fancy phrase to remember. And that is looking at your shadow. When you go outside, look at your shadow. And if your shadow is longer than you are tall, you're making 0 vitamin D. Essentially 0 vitamin D. Okay, so that's where the 10 to 2 or 10 to 3 concept comes from, is that part of the year, if you go out between 10 and 3, your shadow will be shorter than you are tall. In other words, the sun is at least 45 degrees up in the sky. And so the intensity of photons coming down onto your bare skin is enough to penetrate the skin and electromagnetically alter the cholesterol in your skin and turn it into vitamin D. Okay, and then there's various forms of vitamin D that go through the liver and the kidneys and so forth. So sunshine is very important for vitamin D. It used to be the only way we would get it. Okay, but the reality is that I've practiced most of my life in California and in Guam, in the middle of the Pacific, and almost everybody's vitamin D deficient. Almost everybody, unless they supplement. So we're going to be talking about appropriate supplementation later on tonight, or today.
We do have a couple more minutes.
And then let me just finish the first part of the question, which is early morning sunlight. That you're making 0 vitamin D in early morning sunlight. What you're getting is the near infrared. Okay, and that is penetrating. You could go out fully clothed with 2 jackets and a hat and gloves on, and you'll still get all that near infrared all through your body. It goes right through your bones, right through your clothes, and it penetrates deeply into your body, activating every mitochondrial organelle in the cells of your body and organ system to produce more melatonin. So literally, we talk about melatonin being produced by the pineal gland at night and released at night, and that's really good for you in sleep, and it is. But the melatonin that you can produce during the day by being in the sun is 20 times greater. Okay, and so we need to be in the sun at least for 20 minutes a day, preferably early morning, as soon as the sun is up, and that is generating near infrared, okay, and dramatically activating your ability to produce melatonin, which is a powerful antioxidant, literally antitoxin in your body, and so you don't have to pay for that. You can just go out in the sun and get it free.
Okay, real quick.
You believe in earthing? Going to the beach and making the earth.
I love that.
Okay.
I love that. So basically getting grounded, right? Going barefoot, just enjoy spending time outside, preferably in grass that's not, and lawns that aren't sprayed with Roundup, right? That's the one problem with earthing, is that you wonder why little 8-year-old girls are getting precocious puberty because they're rolling around on the soccer field that just got sprayed with Roundup. Okay, so there's one thing about being outside. There's another thing about being outside in a playground or lawn that's been heavily sprayed with chemicals that are endocrine disruptors. So be aware of that consideration. But working outside, working on a garden and earthing, and even being careful if you're barefoot, you want to make sure you don't get some thorn up your foot. But I recently got a major It wasn't a thorn, but it was about a 2 to 3 millimeter piece of bark from trimming my palm trees in Temecula, and I didn't realize it got into my base knuckle. I cleaned it out as best I could, but it kept swelling up, and it was oozing pus, and so I kept putting charcoal poultice on it, which completely sucked all the pus out and took all the inflammation, but guess what? I didn't realize there was that significant piece of bark inside my finger, and it was only after I started messing with it a week and a half later that it popped right out, because I actually cut it open. I said, something's wrong here, it's not healing, and that bark just popped right out. So charcoal is really good, but you got to get to the core of the problem as well.
Two things. One, the question about prostate. What was the product you recommended?
Prostatrol there's many products, but the one I like to use, and I personally use myself, is called Prostatrol Forte, and it's made by Orthomolecular Products.
Okay.
Just a quick question. What particular DNA test kit would you recommend?
Okay. So the two there's many different forms of DNA testing, some that are much more elaborate than others, but the simple ones are Ancestry.com and 23andMe.com. Recently, I've noticed that this Ancestry.com is a lot easier to use. You don't have to jump through as much red tape, and it's cheaper. The concern I have right now is that I'm noticing the last 5 reports I've seen do not include the ApoE4 gene, which was one of the Alzheimer's gene mutation, which is one of the main reasons I had people do the report. Okay, so whereas 23andMe, as far as I know, still does. It's a little bit more expensive, a little bit more of a hassle. They got hacked about 6 months ago, and so they're very particular about letting people even download their own data. You have to go through this 3-day procedure to download. So I don't pay attention to what they say about the genes, by the way. I pay attention to the raw data file, which you can download from the site, but they don't make it easy to do that. They'd rather you just stick with what they say, okay? But I go by the raw data file that then is uploaded into another document or another app that's called MTHFR Support Report. And that gives a 50-page document that I then interpret for the patient, and it usually takes about 2 sessions, an hour each, to go through that in detail. It's like a 24-page narrative report, but we learned so much, and I'll go over it this afternoon in more detail.
Taken internally, how does bentonite clay compare to charcoal?
Well, the challenge has to do with possible impurities. And I think bentonite clay can be used. I like to use like for instance, zeolite, okay, is a chemical that is found in like the zeolite clay. But I use a zeolite that's purified, that's in a spray. And even that some people are concerned with because of the potential contamination with aluminum. Okay, so I will use that from time to time. And I have patients that incorporate that. They have a formula that has some charcoal, some bentonite clay, and other types of clay, and that can be beneficial. I like to stick with the basics like charcoal, like chlorella, which is a really good binder. If there's a mold issue, I might use okra powder as a good binder. So it depends what we're trying to accomplish as well.
I noticed on several occasions you mentioned taking non-starchy vegetables. Dr. McDougall strongly recommends beans and potatoes. I love beans and potatoes. Are you recommending against that?
We all love beans and potatoes. Okay, so I knew Dr. John McDougall very well. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year. I actually had him speak when I was president of the School of Public Health Alumni Association back in 1990, yeah, a long time ago. I had him, the benefit of being president at the time was you got to pick all the speakers for the postgraduate conventions. And so I picked Dr. McDougall because he was one of my main mentors as I was going into clinical lifestyle medicine. He wrote the book, McDougall's Medicine, great book. One thing I learned, though, is that whenever you're dealing with diabetics or people with metabolic syndrome or high triglycerides, you got to check the results based on the advice you're giving. Okay, and so there's some of us, because of our metabolic syndrome, because of our insulin resistance, which we'll cover in a little bit, that have to be careful with how much starch we use. Now, I fully realize that Dr. McDougall basically pushed a starch-based diet. Okay? When I started practicing full-time lifestyle medicine and I was measuring patients' blood sugar after every meal, I realized that it's imperative that we also moderate the amount of starch in many people. Why? Because even though for many people that are lean and fit and healthy, they can eat all the starch they want, for somebody who's struggling with weight, high triglycerides, high blood pressure, but especially high blood sugars, starches will drive blood sugars high. Now, that's still beans. I say you can improve your blood sugars by eating a serving of beans for that meal, and then after the next meal and the next meal. So just one serving of beans improves blood sugars for up to 3 different meals over time. The problem is still spiking blood sugars more than non-starchy vegetables in some people. And so that's why we go by how your body's responding directly. We don't go by theory. We measure your blood sugar 1 or 2 hours after the beginning of the meal, and if your blood sugars are shooting up, that is forcing your pancreas to overproduce insulin and eventually wear out the pancreas so it can't produce insulin. So we need to consider all those factors as we're applying lifestyle medicine principles. So I'm a big fan of beans, especially beans, all forms of beans. I'm less of a fan of potatoes for somebody struggling with metabolic issues because that quickly gets digested and there's not nearly as much fiber and minerals and nutrients in potatoes, even though it's still a healthy food, okay? But it's not necessarily the healthiest food for everyone. It just depends on what we're trying to accomplish. So that's why the base of the pyramid is not starches in my book. It's actually non-starchy vegetables, and then we bring in the starches in moderation according to impact, and then keep increasing it if the body's handling it. So if you're running marathons, like I used to do, okay, or you're super active as a young adult, I had to take in 10,000 calories a day. You can't do that with non-starchy vegetables. It's impossible. You have to eat a lot of starch, okay? But many of us have lost our right or privilege to eat a lot of starchy vegetables because we just metabolically can't handle it. So we need to apply the strategies appropriately to the individual.
Okay, this is our last question.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Are you able to recommend any lab in Southern California that we could contract with individually and or that does live blood analysis? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not aware of labs commercially available, at least, or the typical labs that do live blood analysis, so I'd have to research that. But there's various ways that you can use either LabCorp or Quest, which are the 2 national labs. And by the way, Quest recently bought out LabCorp. They're still separate, which is a real potential problem for monopoly, I guess you would say. I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know why that was allowed, because they were the only 2 big national labs. So that could affect pricing, maybe. But but there's a website called altalabtest.com. Is that the full? altalabtest.com. And they use Quest, and you can go online, create your own account, all by yourself without any other healthcare provider being involved in any way, and order any lab you want at a price. Now the good news is that that price is really low. It's actually about an average of an 80% discount compared to if you just went to a lab and paid their normal retail amount. Okay, so sometimes when you get a lab based on insurance and the lab tech says, oh, you need to sign on this so that if Medicare or your insurance does not cover all the labs, we will bill you. Okay, oftentimes they'll ask you to sign that. And so you're playing a little bit of Russian roulette of whether you're going to get a bill in the mail, and oftentimes that's because the lab did not do their due diligence and write down all the ICD-10 diagnostic codes that your doctor put on the lab form. And so now they're charging you for something that would have been paid for, but they didn't do their job. So you got to be careful with that. So I always recommend never pay a bill from a lab until you've gone through disputation. Because once you paid it, there's no more disputing to be done. It's over. Okay, so sometimes you just got to go back to your doctor and make sure that the lab has properly documented all the ICD-10 codes so that they can pay for it. But if you know a lab is not going to be covered, like I mentioned earlier, the HLA-DRDQ biotoxin susceptibility test, they're never going to, no insurance is going to pay for that. That test used to be $600 to $800. Now it's $120 if you do it through LabCorp discount system. Okay, but Alta Labs is an easy way to do it, and we use that at our clinic as well to help people, significantly decrease their expense.
What is that called? Ultra Lab?
Alta, U-L-T-A, labtests.com.
Alta Lab Tests. Okay, great. We're going to close off the question answer right here because he's got a presentation to do. So take just a quick...
So I've heard.
Take just a quick break here. We're going to do a couple things. He brought a couple books that he is willing to give, one of his books he's read. So I'm going to give this book away to somebody who deals with diabetes. Okay, I've got a hand right back there and right there. We said, well, if there's two hands, which one is the oldest? 77? 85. Okay, we'll get it right back there. And then he's got one more here. Anybody... this is called Hello Health, and this is just strategies to reach your full health and wellness potential. The first one to come up and get this